everyone, welcome back to my channel. Yes, we are here for another analysis. Today I will be presenting about the fabulous world of Jules Verne's from 1958, which was made by the Czech filmmaker and animator Karel Zeman. If you see my eyeline going over there, it's because I'm anxiously looking at my notes. Wes Anderson has pulled from Karel Zeman's filmmaking style, especially in this film when he made A Life Aquatic. I'll talk a little more about it later. Karel Zeman himself pulled from Georges Méliès and the Jules Verne's illustrations, which I will talk about later on. The plot is about Simon Hart, who also plays the narrator, and the professor. The professor is trying to invent the next great power source slash weapon slash advance for science. He gets kidnapped by this evil pirate, Captain Spade, who works for the even more evil Count D'Artigas. I'm not saying his name right. The Count hears about this professor making this great source of energy or tool of destruction, kidnaps the professor and gets the professor to work for him. He's shown one of the first scenes that he's in looking into a mirror, trying on an excessive amount of fancy hats. They blurred and warped the face a little bit, which kind of gives this eerie and evil vibe. So this Count has this submarine that has this pointy end and it stabs other ships and makes them sink, and then he gathers the loot from it. Meanwhile, Simon Hart, the assistant, is kind of kept captive by the pirates in a shack in this volcano that they all work in after they get off the submarine. It is pretty evident in the cinematography that the humans are always dominated by the technology, by all this machinery. And physically, the technology and the machinery and whatever it is always bigger on screen than the humans. There's a couple scenes in the film. One is where the professor and Yana are working together. She's like bringing him tea and he's working at this lab desk, and all the test tubes and like scientific equipment are in the foreground. They're like here to the lens and they're in the background over here. So what you see is that the scientific technology and machinery takes priority. It's closer to the lens and therefore appears bigger. And there's another scene as well when the professor is drawing out like some sort of circuit weird diagram. The camera starts at his drawing and it's seeing it through a transparent table, and then it zooms out. But the angle that it keeps it at is so that the drawing and the technology around them is again taking up the majority of the space on screen. In reality, these technologies that they've invented are actually making the humans serve them. They are working for the machinery, and this is shown in multiple shots. There's one shot where they have these giant cannons of mass destruction. Then there's like workers shown sweeping the cannons on top, which is actually quite comical. We see all these great technological like power plants, kind of like sci-fi stuff in the background, and then we see all these tiny humans pushing carts with tools and parts all around, like laboriously like pushing everything for the machinery. And there's another part where we see the crane and the gentleman in the same shot, and the crane is literally looming over this person. It's much larger, it takes up much more space. So this is 1958, so typically you're going to see a lot of male gaze in film. Not that that stopped, but it was quite strong in the 50s, 60s, and even before that, especially in the 30s, 20s, so there's not as much censorship. The male gaze in this film is directed at the technology and all the powerful tools and machinery they have, not Yana. And this is shown very clearly in a couple shots where she's doing very mundane things like carrying a basket or carrying tea, and she's going through this machinery, and the camera's view of her, or the audience's view of her, is completely blocked by all the machinery. She's engulfed, she's swallowed up by the technology. And this is just so interesting that the male gaze is not concentrated on her potential sexuality on screen, but instead on all this machinery around. In a Hollywood movie of the 50s, early 60s, I would obviously expect some sort of kiss scene or love scene, but not in this film. What also is interesting is whenever we see Yana with technology, her view of her body and her face and everything is blocked, but the one time she's outside, she's by the lake slash lagoon that they live in inside the volcano, and she's like gathering water from it. So you can see her whole body. We have beautiful clear shots of her just gathering water and being peaceful. So it's really interesting that they associate Yana with nature and we see all of her, versus when she's with technology, we only see parts of her. I am sweating. Oh my god. Okay. We also have a very voyeuristic feel in the movie, especially one of my favorite shots ever, and you'll see it all over the internet, is when the professor is just sitting in this tiny chair in this room when they're in the submarine underwater and looking through this big round kind of oval porthole into the ocean. vision. We, as the audience, are conscious that we are watching a movie, which is made by a camera watching this professor who is watching the seahorses. But who was the director of this Jules Verne's film inspired by? And that comes from two different people. He was inspired by Leon Bennett, who did all the Victorian line engravings for the Jules Verne's books, like the original illustrations. He could not picture the adventures in any other way in his head, so he wanted to translate it as accurately as he could. The costuming has a lot of stripes because they wanted to keep everything like the Victorian line engravings in the Jules Verne's novel, which is why I'm wearing stripes today, even though I hate wearing stripes in real life, but I just thought I'd be on theme. So all the characters, not just the pirates, because like Pirates of Stripes, yeah, but all the characters are wearing some sort of vertical or horizontal stripes. And there's one particular scene where all these striped pirates are like sharpening their swords, and then Zeman intercuts it with these machinery shots that are just spectacular to watch. And it really likens these pirates, these workers on board, to part of the machinery. And the other person that really inspired him was Georges Méliès. Georges Méliès was a very early silent filmmaker. He's kind of called, I would imagine at least, one of the fathers of cinema. He was playing all the time with perspectives and layering. Hi, this is Editing Anne in Switzerland. As I'm going through all the footage, I realized I feel like I want to redo this whole analysis, but I won't because I want to move on to the next one. But what I truly missed is I should have watched The Life Aquatic before doing this, because I think the whole analysis should just be about The Life Aquatic versus The Wonderful World of Jules Verne's versus all of Georges Méliès' early films that had to do with being underwater. There's so many similarities in the shots. Granted, Wes Anderson does a much more modern take on the shots, but you can see where he's pulling all these fantastic ideas from. For example, the animals, the sea creatures in the Georges Méliès films were either real sea creatures superimposed or they were cardboard cutouts, and we kind of see that same animated style, this time with 3D models, in the Jules Verne film. And then finally, Wes Anderson moves to the much more modern version, which is animated animals. They don't look realistic, and neither do the Georges Méliès ones or the Carl Zeman ones, but that's kind of the beauty of it, is this artificiality that is animated, and that film is trying to replicate something that is alive, but we already know it's artificial at the same time, and I kind of love that feeling, that style in film. Another great thing is just a couple shots. They're not exactly the same. I could be just like putting this on because this is like how I wish to see it, but there's some shots with Simon Hart, the main character in the Jules Verne films, versus Bill Murray's characters that are very similar with the framing of the portholes and just their actions and what they're doing. There's also a lot of similarities between the submarine used in Wes Anderson's film versus the submarine used in a couple of Georges Méliès films and the submarine used in Carl Zeman's films. It's just really cool to see how this all comes together. Also, really quick before I forget, you can see in the early Georges Méliès films that he would physically lift sets off to transition in scenes, and you can see a very small kind of tinge of that as well in Bill Murray when he's introducing the boat in The Life Aquatic and the whole set lifts up. And I'm sure I'm missing out a lot of details, but those are just some things I wanted to put in because you can't avoid them. History repeats itself, but it builds upon what the founders of film have established and makes it so much more with modern technology and a new view on the world. I don't want to give away the ending completely, but I'm kind of going to, but it will help me summarize this film. Simon and the girl have managed to escape on a hot air balloon. So they're floating away and they throw down like their disguises, and I think that's very symbolic because if you think about it, hot air balloon, especially in the 1800s, was kind of like the future. They're literally flying into the unknown, into the future on the latest technology, away from the sea and being under the sea. Oops, I just touched the mic. Under the sea and all that sort of stuff. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you're inspired to watch the film and not mad that I ruined the ending, but I mean, it's okay. I'm sure you could have guessed it. Oh, like and subscribe. And if you want to follow my Instagram, it's at Anne Makasinski. And yeah, thank you. Julian's yawning. It's so sad. No. Okay, goodbye. No.